Welcome back to the Attack on Titan comparison series. Today we'll cover episode 85, which covers all of chapter 128. As you can see, we're jumping ahead a little bit to reach more of the action-heavy parts of the series, and we might be doing this a little more in the future, so keep it in mind. But with that out of the way, let's get right into the comparison. We start out with some interesting first-person perspectives of Magath looking through a lens at the enemy AI below. You might notice that the rooftops they're standing on are surrounded by some new buildings in the anime. This area now looks generally fuller, especially since we can see some of the soldiers moving around if you look closely enough. This is important information, especially for the crew down below as they start to get ready. Before Magath and Hanji disband though, Hanji notices the smoke coming from the horizon. The anime does this a little different though, as she no longer stands at the top of the cliff for all the soldiers down below to see her. It's also a little harder to tell what it is that actually caught her attention with the zoomed in nature of this cut. With the long shot from the manga, it's a little easier to tell what caught her eye's attention in the first place. It's in this panel that brings us to Annie's dialogue after the opening plays. Dialogue that the Paradise Eldians are having a hard time swallowing. Fortunately, Oniokopon's explanation of the flying boat sets some of the killing talks at ease, as he says the wings still need to be extended by the Azumabito. During that explanation, the manga actually shows here what the boat would look like without the cover off, but we don't get that in the anime. What we do see though is how Mikasa holds her arm with her mark, showing that she cares a little more about her distant relatives than we might think. I gotta say, Connie's reaction to Annie's criticism, while quite strong here, feels a little more emotional in the manga. It really foreshadows how much he'll be struggling to do what needs to be done by the end of the episode. Everyone has a moral compass, but some people are just better at setting it aside for their vision of the greater good. This is what sets Eren apart from his friends, and Reiner realizes this, so he tells them that they don't have to fight. Not that these four like that idea any better. Even John, who says his lines out loud instead of inside of his head this time. Hanji's bad news about the Titans' march doesn't make the mood any better either, as it pushes Magath to initiate a Mortal Kombat takedown on Yelena. While he basically breaks her arm immediately in the manga, he savors the interrogation a little more in the anime, as her arm slowly breaks with some of the most bone-chilling sound effects I've ever heard. For those of you that have broken a bone before, you know exactly what I mean. The additional flailing movements of Yelena are really tough to watch, even for Gabby, who now unintentionally sends some rocks falling to bring Magath back to his senses. Again, Isayama's writing is impeccable here, as he shows just how self-reflective his characters really are. Magath knows that he's been labeling these people as devils for unjust reasons, but he also knows that it was his duty to do so. Just like he's been influenced negatively by Marley, he's also done his part in negatively influencing his warrior candidates, so he bows to his previous enemies, and Gabby and Falco are stunned. Just in the anime though, we don't get their reaction in the manga. We do get the reaction of those he was apologizing to though, as they reaffirm that they all won't be getting out of this port with clean hands. It's now that we move to Floch's quote-unquote conversation with the Azumabitos. A conversation that really doesn't change much regardless of the version, besides some slightly different movements from Floch. Like how after he listens to Kiyomi, he now walks over to a window on his left and smiles creepily, instead of just putting his arm on her shoulder while moving to the right. A change that would lead us into a reversed shot of when Floch put a gun to her head, though luckily he was stopped short from nipping his troubles at the bud by the sound of Armin outside his window. Interestingly enough, this elicits a far less surprised reaction from Floch this time. Armin gets one of his lines cut here, in which he would normally say that he'd also be fine talking to anyone else besides Floch right before the man himself comes to the window. And after some amazing fake tears from Armin, he and Connie are off to the pier to secure their ride. Not with their horses though, because they actually dismount before heading to the dock this time. A change that was likely made to correct the fact that many future manga panels forgot that the horses should have been close by while Armin and Connie are talking to their old friends. And as you can tell, they're having some real performance anxiety here, as the revised angles and extreme close-ups would suggest. A lot of the frontal shots have characters' faces cut off at the edge of the frame, and with the awkwardness of Isayama's art style, there's a real uncomfortable vibe to this scene. This stuff isn't being taken panel by panel anymore as the tension slowly increases, especially with this anime exclusive cut of Armin and Connie's eyes slowly following Daz as he goes to disarm the charges. Despite the warped expressions from Armin and Connie, Daz and Samuel only decide to listen to them because they've known each other since they were recruits, something that we'll touch on a little later. Now that the first phase of the plan is underway and the two of them wait for Floch's response, we move into our next public disclosure cut screen, talking about the flying boat and how it uses the ice burst stone for long distance travel. Now back from commercial break, everything is about to hit the fan as gunshots ring out from Floch's building. When this happened, the anime managed to keep us in suspense a little better this time, as we never actually get the depiction of Kiyomi here reaching for Floch's arm. We just see her chair falling over, like maybe she ran away or something. But of course that was far from the case, as she puts Floch into an arm lock. Or is it a wrist lock? It's kinda hard to tell because the position of Floch's arm as well as where Kiyomi is holding that arm change depending on the version. All I can say is that this one must be more painful because just look at how much pain Floch is in. It looks like he's about to cry. From here, the action goes full throttle as we watch Mikasa getting closer and closer in the window until we get the cut of her smashing through it to save her distant relative by kneeing a guy's face in and giving the other guy a better look at his gun. These actions are unchanging from the manga, but I do have to say that the manga feels far more dynamic in its unhinged rawness. Mikasa's knee basically looks like it merged with the guy's face here as his teeth are pushed further into his mouth. From an impact like that, you can see how he did a full 180 in the air. In the anime though, he just kinda falls down. As for the guy she gun slapped, the gun goes in at an angle where we can see his nose contorting around the barrel as she continues her momentum forward. Two things that we don't exactly get in all of its glory from the anime. From there is when Floch tries to make his escape, and unfortunately we can't see the process of how he broke away from Kiyomi as she's no longer in the shot, but it leads into one of the best panels from this chapter when Floch flies out the window and onto the skies above where he commands the Yeagerists. This is such a monumental panel from the manga, and the anime recreated it well, but it would be nice if MAPPA animated him actually getting this high in such a short amount of time. From one cut to the next, it is a tad jarring to look at. There's also an in-between cut here of him saying Armin's name that seems a bit out of place. Now that Floch is given the attack order, Mikasa has her work cut out for her as the Yeagerists start to converge around her. This shot here is really interesting in how it's framed, as we essentially follow this CGI soldier down from the roof as he mixes in with the rest of the soldiers from other roofs on their way to Mikasa. It was tackled a little differently from the manga, where they all just kind of appear in front of the window and yell fire. In addition to the soldiers' new movements, Mikasa's got some of her own too, like how she now gets slammed into a wall after the explosion destroys the room. Okay, that's not really a move, but she does do this cool thing where she jumps off the sidewall to get closer to the engineers. Normally she would have just jumped over the handrails to get to the attackers. For the anime, you can really tell that she's decided to go in for the kill now, because there's a blink and you'll miss it cut of her pulling out her blades this time. But before she could get to them, some well-placed bullets by her friends already took care of that threat. Maybe even more efficiently too, as it only required 3 bullets this time instead of 4. Though I am a fan of the messier style deaths from the manga as they penetrate different parts of their skulls. It's nice that we get some anime exclusive blood splatter on the ground afterwards though. However, it does suspiciously look like a blood smear, which is a little confusing because there wasn't ever a scene with— oh no. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a match. This is the point when I realized MAPPA was working on an extremely tight timetable for this episode because things like this simply don't slip through the cracks. It was intentionally put here with some different coloring because they likely didn't have time to make another cut for it. Not only that, but we don't even see the animation of Mikasa landing. She's just kinda there. Regardless, we'll put that on the side for now as we move back to Armin and Connie at the dock where Daz is about to reconnect the detonating charges. There's really not too many changes worth mentioning here, such as how Armin says Daz's name instead of Connie. You know, little changes that don't really matter much as Armin still gets shot up by Samuel regardless. You can tell Samuel didn't want to do it. They've known each other since all the way back. These guys have kind of been background characters up to this point, and honestly speaking, I kind of forgot about them. For those of you who also forgot, Samuel was one of the ones that made the promise with everyone to share some meat that Sasha stole way back when. He's also the one that Sasha saved when the Colossal Titan breached the Tross District. Daz, on the other hand, was one of the ones stranded without any gas in the middle of the Tross District as Mikasa and John led them to safety, as well as the one who started breaking down before Pixie's speech to reclaim the district. While we might not have seen these guys at their best during these scenes, they still trained together for years and probably interacted with each other even more during the 4-year time skip. So they care for each other more than you might think. It's why Daz is so hesitant to blow up the boat and Samuel is so hesitant to shoot Connie. He did shoot Armin though, but he'll be fine. He'll walk it off in a few hours. I love how confident MAPPA is when putting characters right in our faces. Their attention to detail in this scene, from Connie's shaking eyes to the barrel of the gun that blurs into the scene here, is just so good. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, things are starting to get a little intense for the Azumabito rescue squad. Kiyomi's voice actor nailed this scene, as her revised facial features elicit some really strong deliveries from her character. Same with Magath and his revised sense of urgency. Urgency that'll bring us into anime exclusive territory as we now watch the troops fall back a bit to start getting more explosives ready. The lines by this soldier here are relocated from the panel of Floch witnessing the action from a distance, a panel that we'll get into in just a second. After that shot of the soldiers falling back, that leads us into another anime exclusive shot of the Yeagerists, or what's left of them, trying to get into the basement by bashing their way in. It's after this when Floch does a sick backward swing to adapt the panel of him observing the battlefield from above. A battlefield that has since changed a little bit. See, the manga shows soldiers doing another bombing run, but in the anime they must have still been getting more thunder spears because this cut is now more of a boots on ground affair everywhere as bullet traces and sparks fly out of the basement. As Floch is slowly starting to realize what's happening, we move into some of the best anime exclusive cuts this episode as Reiner and Annie start making their grand appearance. Let's start with Reiner's cut. Reiner was never a prodigy when it came to ODM gear. After all, he hasn't used it in 4 years, but he's got the standard movements down as his body weight shifts from left to right, increasing his speed along the way, and by the end of the cut, he has enough speed to use the rest of his gas to get real high into the air and fly past all the unsuspecting soldiers who clearly didn't see him coming in as they follow him into the skies above. Again, the in-your-face nature of cuts like this makes everything look 10 times more impressive, as when he flies past the camera, it's then that he decides to bite his hand. I love the attention to detail here, as we can see his last line going out and retracting by the end of the cut, and I especially like watching the individual reactions of all the soldiers he flies past. Annie, on the other hand, decides to take a far more covert route as she flies in between an unfamiliar tower structure in the same way Reiner did in the Heaven's Feel movie. It's actually uncanny how similar it is, as Annie sticks with that same laid-back pose all the way through, relying mainly on her gas to get her through this laid-back motion of hers. And again, just like Reiner's cut, it's another one of those in-your-face affairs as she flies past the camera and out into the open sea. It looks like during that time she decided to put a line out to give her some more whiplash motion at the end when she flies upwards to join Reiner behind Floch, finally adapting this panel here of him completely realizing what's happening. I love how this moment of realization is followed immediately by the orange light behind him of the two transforming in sync, as well as the sick Cold War poses they strike while they're doing it. Annie's might be a little different from the manga, but it actually looks cooler in my opinion, as the epic feel of this scene is top notch with how they timed the music of them transforming. And it's that transformation that gives Connie the opening he needs as he quickly tackles Samuel while he's distracted, and our friends on the sidelines react to the events on the field below. Really wish Levi could have been a part of this battle. It's been far too long since we've seen him in action. But luckily we got some other action to attend to, as Annie and Reiner are about to take on the rest of the Yeagerists. This fight encompasses just about 3 panels in the manga, but MAPPA had no such intention of making this a quick affair, as this is the first time we've seen these two fight together like this. Surprisingly enough, a lot of this stuff is actually 2D, starting with the cut of Annie's legs coming out of the smoke and hitting the ground as the rotation of the camera levels out. This leads into some sick pose work of the two fully ready for any attacks that might come their way. They just look so cool together, and the soldiers start to realize that too as they start running away from Annie's grasp. These are the kind of 2D cuts I yearn for as we watch the Yeagerists' reaction as the monolithic hand grows closer and closer to them. 2 of them managed to dive out of the way, but the last guy was a little late to react. As for Reiner's cut though, this one is in 3D, even the soldier that was pounded out of existence. And from there the glory continues as 3 of the 3D Yeagerists decide to focus their efforts on the now 3D female Titan. Switching to 3D here was probably the right call, as the scale of this cut kind of demands as much. It also probably made it easier to more accurately show the shadow beneath the soldier at the beginning of this cut. Not the other soldiers though, those guys are vampires. That aside, the dynamic nature of this cut is extremely impressive. It's cool how the cut starts with us following one soldier before we leave him behind and start circling past his other 2 friends. This circling motion actually leads us back to the soldier that we were following at the beginning as he dodges Annie's swipe, and we quickly move into a bird's eye view of the action. These soldiers may be in CGI, but with the speedy realignment of the models, it really gives off a 2D feel sometimes. It was pretty smart of MAPPA to stick to rendering these guys on 2s, otherwise that feeling probably wouldn't have been portrayed as well. With how well these 3 work in tandem, it's no guess to say that this cut is likely an ode to Wit Studios' one in the first season. A similar 3-way attack was used just like this back in the day, and chances are, just like back then, Annie would have gotten out of this just fine, but she has backup this time. It is a little weird though how these 3 soldiers suddenly got close enough for Reiner to do this all in one punch, but it's cool, so we'll let it slide. That aside, I'm actually kind of impressed by how they did Annie's hair here. I get the feeling that it's completely 2D animated, as there seems to be some ever so slight disconnect between it and her body, but MAPPA did a solid job at blending these 2 art forms together. It's not UFO table level, but it's enough to get the job done. As for the remaining Yeagerists, an anime exclusive line here suggests that they're all out of Thunder Spears, so they start to retreat as Annie gets her footing back and goes in for a cool low bar pose before charging them down. I love Annie's acrobatic form here. She must not like the fact that Reiner helped her that much, because she abandons protecting her Nate for a bit as she literally puts her entire upper body weight into a kick that sends these 2D Yeagerists out into the sea. This is where we start to get back into sync with the manga, as after 2 vacant manga panels of Floch's fight with those in the basement, we move over to Connie and Armin fighting to save the flying boat. There's some changes here. To start, after Daz looks over his right shoulder and not his left, Samuel tells him to blow up the boat and he starts fixing the wiring again. But in the manga, he doesn't do that. He instead just shouts Samuel's name as Armin jumps on him. This change was probably for the better, as the act of Daz starting to rig the explosives again should give Armin even more incentive to stop Daz, even if his old friend is now pointing a gun at his head. Armin seems almost brain dead at this point, but that doesn't stop him from getting closer to Daz. Even more than Armin though, this is the sort of situation I think Connie is struggling with more. He was so content with laying blame to Reiner and Berthold in the past, but now hearing someone else call him traitor is giving him the perspective he needs. Like Berthold said, it's not like they want to do this, it's just that they have no other choice. Back then, Berthold said that even though they betrayed them, he still thought of them all as friends. And Armin also feels that now more than ever, as Daz's crying face triggers some of Berthold's memories of how horrible he felt during that moment when he was confronted by his friends. And this time Berthold's lines from back then are actually in this scene now. It's really powerful stuff. No one here was ever evil, they've just got opposite objectives that need to be fulfilled at any cost, and while Armin doesn't really have the motor functions to do anything about it at this point, Connie does, so the deed will fall to him. This is where we get the final changes of the episode, as after Connie wrestles the gun out of Samuel's hands, Samuel no longer shouts for Connie to stop as he points the gun at Daz, but he does say stop as Connie now slowly looks at him with tears in his eyes. He instead waits until after the deed is done, as Armin continues to hear Berthold about how someone needs to stain their hands with blood. This isn't actually in chapter 128. The chapter actually ends as the gunshots hit Samuel, but nonetheless, this is also pretty much where episode 85 ends. Really sad and morbid storytelling aside, this episode was acceptable. It had some standout flaws that really shouldn't have made it in, but it's important to note that a lot of these things here wouldn't have been found if we weren't doing a deep dive video. Most of the stuff here is perfectly fine and gets the job done. I imagine a good deal of what we covered will be resolved in a Blu-ray release, but it sucks that the harsh deadlines MAPPA had to meet forced them to make some compromises here and there. It's something that I don't necessarily blame them for though. It's actually amazing that we're even able to get a new season so soon with everything else MAPPA is working on, and that it's even at the level where most fans can be pleased with the result. While it's not hard to tell that some of this stuff is rushed, they're still working hard to give us a good result. Hell, if they didn't care, then they wouldn't have delayed the final episode in the first place. But before that final episode does come out, I'm excited to see how this next one will pan out. We've still got some more action ahead of us with the female and armored titan, so hopefully things will get even better from here on out. This video might have been a tad overcritical here and there, but nonetheless, if you guys enjoyed it, make sure to give it a like and share it with a friend. And hey, maybe get subscribed for more MAPPA comparison content. Well, that's it for me. As always, I hope you all have a fantastic day. This is Registry, signing off.